On today's Rebel's Edge, coming to you live from Cardone Studios, Trump to Powell, you're fired. The U.S. dollar hits a 3-year low. What's that all about? The tech wreck continues. Why? Because it's a day that ends in Y, and earnings season kicks off big time with a lot of major tech names reporting. We've got Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, Tesla, all on deck. Strap in, folks. It's going to be a wild week. We'll cover all of that and more on today's Rebel's Edge.
Well, welcome back to another week where, as Marc says, if the day ends in Y, we're trading to the downside, apparently. It's not really all that funny, folks. But there are opportunities that are created by markets like these, and we're going to try to navigate and help you navigate through them. Marc LoPresti, of course, CEO of Market Rebellion. I'm John Najarian. Pete will be joining us from somewhere in Florida, an undisclosed location, where he'll be bringing us sports. But Marc, let's talk about the market to the downside. We'll talk about Europe being closed today in the macro minute, because European bourses, folks, are indeed closed today. They will reopen tomorrow, but the escalating trade tensions are what everybody is talking about, Marc.
It's true. And, you would have thought that with the Italian prime minister coming to the White House, being so warmly received, giving the kind of guidance or the kind of outlook on those meetings that they would come away with a deal, that we would see a little bit of positivity. Market was closed on Friday. That gives the volatility time, typically speaking, to calm down a little bit. But man, we did not get what we were hoping for in our Easter basket this morning. That is for damn sure. That was down almost 1,000 points in today's low before we went live.
Wow. And we had the pontiff pass away on Easter Sunday. And now apparently the president wants Jerome Powell to pass away, or at least pass the torch, if not pass away. I don't really think he's trying to wish death on the Fed chairman, but he certainly is not very happy with the way the Fed chair is handling things, Marc.
No, and unfortunately, the world reacting, the dollar at a 3-year low, right? Because what a lot of market watchers were saying, if we see continued aggressive talk like this from President Trump, trying to remove the Fed chairman, which is not within the scope of presidential power, what kind of certainty, what kind of stability does that show the rest of the world in terms of our overall financial system? What does this mean for the appetite for our bonds and when we go to the market to try to raise capital in the debt markets? It's a slippery slope, but I got to tell you, hard for me to disagree with President Trump in certain respects. I've called him the feckless Fed for years now. Too little, too late. And look at Europe. What's he waiting for?
Yeah, Europe's at 2.2%, folks, for many of the big economies in Europe. Both the UK, which is no longer part of the EU, and of course the EU, much lower interest rates than we've got right here. And the Fed's trying to keep interest rates higher rather than lower. And I think they're going to be wrong again. Marc, let's talk about fantastic futures.
Let's do it.
I'll say gold, folks, because China, for the 5th month in a row, has been buying gold hand over fist. They bought 5 tons of the yellow metal, and that's an awful lot. It pushes their holdings to a new record. I think a lot of us understand why. Uncertainty has lifted up both gold and Bitcoin, Marc.
Yeah, and you got to wonder, to what extent is that a single track agenda on China's part or a dual track agenda on China's part? And what do I mean by that? Obviously, acquiring and increasing their stockpile theoretically improves things from a monetary policy perspective versus the United States. But gold, of course, as many watchers and viewers know, is a critical and rare earth mineral that's used in semiconductor production. It's used in chip production. And of course, China announcing, hitting us where it hurts last week, saying, guess what? Not just 125% reciprocal tariff, but we're going to cut you off from those rare earth minerals that you need not only for consumer electronics, but for the manufacturing of electronics and chips that are required for national defense. that was a pretty shrewd and cruel move on Xi's part. And I wonder if this is part of it. And the only other thing I'll mention from a futures perspective, John, is I'm watching oil, $63. Feels great when you fill up your SUV at the gas station. Doesn't feel great when you look at what the overall outcome is or the outlook is for the oil industry that was expecting a much better Q1 and Q2 than they've got so far.
I'm looking at the VIX too. Since Pete isn't with us, I'm going to cover the VIX just quickly.
We got it.
It is up $4.45 to 34.10. So pushing back up like that lets you know, folks, that rather than pulling back from big ups and big downs in the market, we are expecting more of the same when the VIX moves up like that. So keep in mind that 50 Cent, that trader that we track, is probably out there rubbing his hands together, Mark, gleefully preying on the fear that is generated by the markets. All right, Tesla. Will it generate fear, Mark, tomorrow? Because they've got earnings tomorrow, folks. And this is all about how Tesla is doing with the new Model Y, which is basically just coming out there at a lower price point and a beautiful looking vehicle. But because of what Elon Musk has been doing with Doge and other things, like I guess with X, some people still want to carve swastikas into the cars. Some people still want to key these vehicles and so forth. And I think full self-driving is going to be miraculous, FSD. I think also that what he's doing in robotics with Optimus, for instance, is also going to be huge. But are either one of those going to be enough to turn this around, Mark?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think so. And as you know, I'm a big Elon fan. I'm a believer. I think he is one of the smartest entrepreneurs and CEOs in modern history. It's hard, though, to counter the naysayers that are questioning whether or not he's been taking his eye off the ball with Tesla and SpaceX and other industries that he's in charge of course, with what he's doing in his role in the Trump administration. But taking all of the Elon effect out of the story, the numbers and the guidance and the outlook have not been great for the past couple of quarters for Tesla. You're seeing decreased demand even before all of the protests. You're seeing increased encroachment from Chinese competitors in that Chinese market, which is obviously massive and important for Tesla. You've seen they're pulling back in terms of Cybertruck deliveries, orders for the Cybertruck, as many as you see on the road in places like New York and Los Angeles, that is not sold as well as Tesla was hoping. I don't like betting against Elon, but I don't feel too good going into tomorrow's earnings.
We just broke through some of the lows that Tesla had put in earlier this year. So if we don't come right back above it pretty quick, Mark, people are going to definitely be on the short side into earnings.
Yeah, well, if we break through, I mean, we talk about that with the technicals in some of our other shows all the time. If we break that support, right, that bottom level there, it tends to mean you go even lower.
Discover Financial, one of the few stocks trading to the upside today. And why? Well, because their merger with Capital One, COF, is apparently going to be able to go through banking regulators saying they didn't have a problem with it. So with that regulatory approval, Federal Reserve and Office of the Controller of the Currency are basically all that could stand in the way, and it doesn't seem like they will, Mark. So it seems like these two are getting together.
Yeah, they are. And look, this is the kind of deal activity that the street is looking for, that the banks that advise on these types of deals are looking for. This is the kind of deal that may not have gone through under a Biden-Harris or Harris-Walz administration on antitrust concerns. This is the kind of thing that we expect to benefit from a continued decrease in banking regulation and things of that nature. So yeah, I think this is good news, obviously, for shareholders of those companies. We'll see the extent to which this turns into good news for consumers, right? Because these are two companies that are very largely and heavily involved in consumer credit card, being the majority of the business of both of these two industries, and whether decreased competition in that space results in better deals for cardholders. We'll see. But for shareholders and investors, good news, and we should expect to see more of this under President Trump.
All right. Well, what about Nvidia, Mark? Because downward pressure continues on this stock. Basically, Huawei, the large producer of tech and chips and phones, all manner of things in China, they also make the sort of chips that Nvidia makes at a much lower price, as you might imagine. Now, they might not be the same chips as the H100s that Mr. Huang was selling over at Nvidia, and he was pricing them at close to $50,000 a chip. But when somebody else comes out with a chip that they can export anywhere, even if it's with a lot of tariffs, you got to think, Mark, that they're putting downward pressure on pricing for the Nvidia H100 chips.
Well, I'll tell you when pricing becomes completely irrelevant, John, is when you can't sell a damn chip to China, right? Yeah. And I mean, this is what happened last week with Nvidia. The word came out, not about tariffs. This was about export controls. And look, and I commented on this last week on a couple of our friendly networks. I understand the national security concern. We don't want the Chinese military having the absolute best of the chips that we manufacture here in the United States. But when we talk about the non-tariff trade policies of this administration, and you look at export restrictions and something like this, it's another area that can significantly impact to the downside, of course, companies like Nvidia. So to me, this is not so much about the quality of Huawei's chips. I don't think they compare to Nvidia's. It's not about even price. It's about, can you sell the damn things to the Chinese market? Because if you can't, price doesn't really matter. And, you know, look, I'm still a believer in Nvidia. I'm still a long-term bull in Nvidia. I've been adding to the position in some of my personal accounts, even on the pullback last week. Before the major pullback that came on Wednesday, that was painful. But this is not a stock you're going to regret owning a year from now, folks, or maybe even 6 months from now. So fret not, Nvidia shareholders. It hurts now, but in the long term, you'll be very happy that you held the stock.
Well, let's wind it up with Apple, Mark, because Apple, of course, Tim Cook and Apple got good news in the prior weekend when the president said, you know what, I'm going to pause tariffs on those smartphone imports, because virtually everything Apple does in smartphones is manufactured overseas.
Yeah.
So the import of that, if it comes in with that huge 134%, 184%, 1,000%, whatever it is, tariff on it, by doing away with that, there should have been a more significant pop, we both thought, out of Apple. But it is still under some pressure even today, a week later, Mark. And Apple has not made that V-shaped recovery off of any of the bottoms that we've seen. Instead, it just keeps down testing to new lows.
Yeah, and you got to wonder if Trump's added Dr. Evil to his cabinet when they're coming up with these tariffs. 1,000% tariffs on Chinese imports. And it wasn't just on smartphones. Of course, that was a reprieve that the president gave to consumer electronics in general. So smartphones, iPads, laptops, things of that nature, things that we need. And look, unfortunately, I think, John, there's two reasons why you didn't see much of a benefit here. Number one, even before President Trump took office, we covered a lot last year in Q3 and Q4 about Apple's decreasing, shrinking market share. Where? In China, right? Of course, there's a big story there where Apple is not as ubiquitous as it is here in the United States, particularly in the smartphone market. So you combine that, which is already a melting ice cube, with the pressure and the concern around tariffs and the uncertainty. There's a reprieve now, but shareholders and investors are not convinced that President Trump might not change his mind tomorrow when Chairman Xi cuts off access to, I don't know, fortune cookie inserts. And then he says, no, we're back to putting those tariffs on consumer electronics. Well, you know, that the rumor is that the fortunes are getting worse. It's sort of a quiet stealth territory trading. They were never very good, but you know, my trick was always just to add embed to the end of any fortune. If you haven't tried that, folks, try it, but not when you're having dinner with the kids.
Apple down 24% year to date.
Unbelievable.
Nvidia's down worse than that. Tesla's down worse than that. But none of these are good news for tech investors, Mark.
And it's really going to be all about earnings this week, but folks, it's not just going to be about last quarter's numbers. Last quarter's numbers are not reflective of what's gone on during the tariff tantrum. What we're going to be looking for is guidance. Number one, do we get it? If we don't get it,
they pull it.
They pull it, right? And that, if we see, especially in these big tech names, if we see the CEOs decide to pull not issue guidance at all, or substantially, significantly pull back guidance, we can see even further downward pressure in the market this week. It's not something we wish on anyone, including ourselves, but hey, we're just here to report the news.
Well, now let's throw it out to Pete, who's got a little sports that maybe you guys will find a little solace in the sports, since it's hard to find it in the stock market.
Thanks a lot, John. Jared is with me, and we're going to talk a little bit about these sports. You get an opportunity now to see what Jared looks like. He's our producer. He does a great job, and he's got a lot of thoughts about this whole thing in the sports world as well. But before we jump right to it, Jared, let's go to this clip, because this sort of is something that we saw and talked about a little bit last week, and there's a little bit more closure this week. So let's hear what this one, and watch what this one looks like.
This Nico Iava situation is the biggest clusterfuck I have ever seen. So if you don't know the basics about this whole
Sorry about the F-bombs.
Former Tennessee quarterback Nico Iava, just watch this video. But for a basic Cliff Notes version, he wanted more NIL money. Tennessee offered him about $2.6 million. He wanted $4 million.
$2.6 million,
so
Jared.
He said, I saw Carson Beck go from Georgia to Miami. I want Carson Beck money. Mind you, he said this without Carson Beck results.
He wasn't
so
signed a contract, but then he wanted 2.6.
He gets picked
then
up
he wanted
for
4.
transfers to UCLA. But then yesterday, the details come out of the money that he's getting at UCLA.
This is what counts.
And it makes no sense. He goes, hey, Tennessee, I want $4 million just like Carson Beck. Tennessee says, no, we'll give you $2.6 million.
By the way, he's not Carson Beck yet.
He says,
numbers aren't even
close. I'm gonna transfer. So he transfers to UCLA. However, UCLA is only giving him about $1.5 million in NIL value.
Anybody tell him about taxes?
Dad, now that he's realizing, must have forgotten that taxes exist. Mind you, he played in Tennessee. Tennessee has no state income tax. He was making $2.6 million. He transferred to UCLA in California, the highest tax state in the country, where apparently after taxes, he's only going to be bringing in about $800,000 to $900,000, whereas at Tennessee, he'd be bringing in about 1.6.
Yeah, but that's a huge difference from what he could have got.
It's all his dad. Dad doesn't care about the program. He just cares about the money. And he has a track record of doing this with Nico's brother, Madden, as well. We can see that his dad's a little shady from this right here, because On3 reported that he's thinking about transferring and holding out, and his dad was like, no, that's not happening. Then later,
I don't know if his dad is shady.
He was transferring. And
I think his dad's just trying to get the most that he can, and most for his son. But is he really informed enough to be that guy, right? Anyway, that's the clip. We had to show you that first because, it's all about this spring portal. And we talked a little bit about this last week, Jared, and it was interesting because we talked about a school like Texas Tech. Well, they continue to be the lead right now since the spring portal started just a couple of days ago. They're doing a great job. They're grabbing the right people. LSU is doing great. Ole Miss is doing fantastic. Oregon with Phil Knight's money, it's limitless. So I think Oregon's going to probably do pretty well. Miami, pretty close to limitless as far as money, as far as those donors. They're doing very well. They're the ones who paid Carson Beck $4 million to come down there to Miami. Not so bad, leaving Georgia to go back down. By the way, Florida is also a no-tax state. Anyway, when you look at all of this, Jared, it's crazy. And I know that you have some thoughts because you don't have to have played in sports, in the NFL or any of that stuff to have some ideas about, hey, this sounds pretty ridiculous or this sounds kind of fair or whatever. But this poor Nico kid, I think he got really bad advice from his father. I think his brother, unfortunately, is showing a bad side as well. By the way, his brother actually committed to UCLA. His brother's name's Madden. You know where he went? Arkansas. You know why? Because Arkansas paid him more money. He'd already given himself to go to UCLA, and now the brother, Nico, is coming from Tennessee. And by the way, he had good numbers, not great numbers. Is he athletic as hell? Yeah. Is he a great quarterback? He's very good. He's not great. He's very good, and he'll take a little bit of time. But what do you think about this whole thing? Because when you consider the money that's involved and the fact that he thought that he was deserving of this, and Tennessee said, we've got a lot of guys on the team, and we've got to spread this money around. It's not going to happen. It's not even going to come close. Unbelievable, right? I mean, what's your take on it, Jared?
Well, first of all, I'm glad these guys are getting paid in the first place. Yep. I'm not sure it needs to be said, but, they put their bodies on the line, and a lot of them get injured before they have a chance to go to the pros.
Right.
However, I don't think it makes sense to be paying superstar salaries to the college students. I'm glad they're getting money, and I'm glad they're getting a lot of it, enough to take care of them. I think honestly, it makes sense to put a regulation in where within a given team, all of the players get an even stake. I think that would do a lot for camaraderie. It would do a lot to take some of the negative impact out of the high school level. If these kids aren't jumping, if the ones that get the most attention aren't jumping directly into multi-million-dollar contracts in college, they could do a lot for the spirit of the game and bring focus back to, well, what's the program that fits best with my style, with my personality? That's what my whole life growing up, it was all about the program. Learning about the program, what program you want to go to, what school you want to go to. I see this crazy explosion of NIL as undermining a lot of what I've always loved about college sports. I've been a guy that I've always been more into college sports than pro sports, particularly in football. And what do you think about that? What do you think about the idea that within a team, not all college players get the same NIL money, but within a team, you're bringing your personality, your performance, you're contributing to the team's NIL take, not just simply to your own maximum NIL take.
Yeah, I think that there's got to be some way that they can piece this thing together. And I've been approached by people to help with this process, actually. But the reality is right now, the way it's set up, there is no cap. There is no, if you're Oregon and you've got Phil Knight, Nike, as your biggest donor, you already have a leg up on everybody else. And the idea that you're talking about, which is individuals getting just unbelievable paydays, right? I mean, that's incredible. Isn't this still a team sport? If you're a great quarterback, don't you rely on your offensive line? Don't you rely on a running back making the block or getting the yards that you need, or receiver catching the ball? All of that. So they're not in the NFL yet. And I think that, it's great that they're paying the players, as you're talking about, but there's got to be a better way for them to figure out distribution and how much money that they actually can have out there. Because what are we really building now with some of these schools that have incredible endowments and NIL money and all the rest of it, right? Versus those who don't. And we see this more and more and more, because I'll tell you what, all you've got to do is look at the SEC. They've done a great job with college football, right? We talk about Alabama and Georgia, all these various schools, Tennessee. But the reality is that's great. But it's now even spread over into basketball, where they're all of a sudden, the SEC didn't used to be a big basketball conference. Now they are. They put the most schools this year into the March Madness of any different conference that there is. SEC dominated it. Used to be an ACC thing, those schools, and Big Ten, and maybe we had a Pac-12. We don't have a Pac-12 anymore. You got a Pac-2. But in any case, I think it is interesting, and they need to start thinking this through a little bit better and implementing some of the different stuff that they need to do, or it's just going to get worse and worse and worse, Jared. And you know what? The big get bigger and the small get smaller, and it's just going to turn into a completely different game, which would be really unfortunate.
So let me ask you this: do we have players mid-college career renegotiating their NIL, or is it simply like you got to jump ship, you have to go to a new school to increase your NIL? Say you're a sleeper that's really performing, gets a lot of attention after the fact.
Yeah, it happens in every way, and absolutely, there are guys that could be there, and they were getting paid $200,000 as a number. Well, all of a sudden they've got an agent, which is new, but they've got an agent who goes down and says to the head coach at Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin, they say, hey, he's getting paid $200,000 here at Michigan. What would you give him down here? $500? Okay, he's ready. Boom, he's going to set up. He's now at Ole Miss. So that's what we're seeing, more and more of that, which is, it's this open free agency, so to speak, that is interesting. I think there are some other curbs that need to be done there too. I just don't think that they're doing enough fast enough. And until they do, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. And we're seeing how bad it is right now, I think, at the college level. It's really a zoo, and nobody has full control, but I'll give you a great example. Cal Berkeley, they lost 4 different running backs to the portal. Now they only had 5. And I'll give you another example. The basketball team at Baylor, there's not a single player from that team that is remaining still there. They've either transferred they've graduated, or they're going into the NBA. That's it. They're no longer going to be players on the title just a few years ago. This is a big time program, and they lost all these guys. Isn't that amazing?
That's crazy.
I think it is. It's absolutely crazy. All right. Do you want to jump to the next one? How about we jump?
Let's talk about the NBA.
Let's talk about the NBA. And here's what I have to say about it. I've been critical of the NBA all year, particularly the commissioner. And I think for all the right reasons. More and more people seem to be jumping on that bandwagon and the load management and all of those kinds of things. It's just unfortunately almost become unwatchable. Well, here's what we've got going on in the NBA right now. So we've gotten ourselves into the first round of the playoffs, right? And they had the play-in games. And now they're in the first round. First games. Pacers beat the Bucks 117-98. The Knicks 123-112 over the Pistons. The Timberwolves 117 over 95 against the Lakers. The Thunder won by 51 points against the Grizzlies, 131-80. The Celtics 103-86, and the Cavs 121-100. What does that tell me? It tells me this: people are probably turning off their television sets, and the answer is yes, they are, because all you've got to do is take a look at what the ratings look like. Earlier in the season, these guys were down 20%, and already as you've gotten into the playoffs, now it's down 2%. Well, why is that? Well, because it's just not exciting basketball because of the fact that they've got a lot of different things. They had the load management early on, but now as you get into the playoffs, people aren't doing the load management the same way now, but they are also getting themselves in a position where they're just blowing out their opponents, and people are just bored with it, and they're going, click, let's go to the American Idol. I mean, they're going to whatever they're doing. So it's really not so great, and that's TNT, that's ESPN. You can go through the whole list, and they've paid a lot of money, Jared, to get the rights to be able to televise these things. And I'll tell you what, they're not getting their money back, that's for sure. They're losing money on these deals in a big way. That's it for sports. I'm going to send it right back to you, John.
Well, some very interesting moves in sports as well as the market, Mark. I'm really looking forward to when the pain finally slows down. We all know it's not going to just stop, but maybe it'll slow down a little bit, because seeing drops like 900 points in the Dow and 2% and 3% drops in the NASDAQ, that really has us feeling the pain. We'll hope that we can turn it around and feel a little bit better about this tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. From here at 10X Studios, Cardone Enterprises, John Najarian, Marc LoPresti. Have a great day, everybody.